Welcome to the Sencast. My name is Dale Pickles. I'm the Managing Director of B Squared and the host of the Sencast, the podcast for special education and disability. This episode, released in support of Deaf Awareness Week, which is on 4th to 10th of May 2026, explores what it's really like to live with hearing loss and deafness. Discussing this with me is Samantha Baines. Samantha is an award-winning actress, comedian and broadcaster who, after discovering she was deaf, has become a powerful voice for the deaf community, using her platform to educate, challenge misconceptions and champion accessibility. The Sencast is created by us here at B Squared, and we help schools to show the small steps of progress pupils with SEND make. And we help schools to show progress for a wide range of abilities and ages. For the most complex learners working within the engagement model, our engagement steps can build a profile of the student's needs and shows the progress, however spiky, they are making. Visit the B Square website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through our assessment software. But for now, let's get on with that podcast. This episode, released in support of Deaf Awareness Week, explores what it's like to live with hearing loss and deafness. My guest is Samantha Baines, an award-winning actress, comedian and broadcaster who, after discovering she was deaf nearly 10 years ago, has become a powerful voice for the deaf community, using her platform to educate, challenge misconceptions and champion accessibility. Welcome to the show, Samantha.
Thanks for having me.
You are very, very welcome. Today we're obviously talking about living with hearing loss and deafness, and I'm really excited about this episode because this is an area I don't have lived experience of, and most of what I picked up has been through the media. And my limited research for this episode has shown me how much I don't know. So I'm here to learn. Where shall we start?
Well, a good place to start would be to do a deaf awareness course online, but we can start with our chat and then you can book that in. But there's a brilliant deaf awareness sort of training body actually called Signature. They're a charity and they do a deaf awareness course online, which is £20. So I feel like that's a really accessible amount. And a lot of times people think when you're getting, disability training or you're trying to pitch it into your work environment, I think bosses go, oh, how much is this going to cost me? They shouldn't, but they do. So I think it's really great to be able to say it's £20 and it'll give you a kind of starter. And so I think that's nicely accessible for everyone.
I've just literally written that down and I'll add a link. So for those interested, that will be in the show notes when I find that link.
Yeah. And I am an ambassador for the Royal National Institute of Deaf People, and they do training as well, and they can do kind of more in-depth training as well. But yeah, a very easy online place to start is with Signature.
Excellent.
Or following me on Instagram, because I do videos about it too.
And all the links for all about you and lots of following you will all be in the show notes as well. I've added all of them already. So I suppose probably one of the best places to start is what does everyone else get wrong about hearing loss?
Lots of things, actually. I think the most important thing for me is the language. And that's quite often an area where people feel uncomfortable and like they don't want to get it wrong, or they've, heard the wrong thing or maybe have outdated information. So the phrase to avoid is hearing impairment. So that's a very outdated phrase, and the deaf community don't like impairment because, of the connotations to do with that, which is interesting because the partially sighted and blind community, I hear, don't mind the phrase sight impaired, but the deaf community don't tend to like hearing impaired, even though a lot of education departments are still called hearing impaired department or unit or whatever that is. So if you run one of those units, please consider changing the name. Because, yeah, hearing impaired is not something the deaf community enjoy. Hearing loss as a phrase tends to be the language used in a medical setting. So, an audiologist will quite often tell you after your hearing test, you have hearing loss. But again, that tends to be, something, a diagnosis in inverted commas, because again, I don't like the phrase diagnosis because it sounds like you're being diagnosed with some sort of disease, and being deaf isn't a disease. I love being deaf. So quite often it's later in life and you go for a hearing test and the audiologist says you have hearing loss. Um, I call myself deaf with a lowercase d. And so that phrase, deaf with a lowercase d, encompasses the whole range of deaf experience. So that means people who are born profoundly deaf, as in they have little or no hearing at all and grow up using British Sign Language in a deaf family, as part of deaf culture. And it also covers people who are deafened, late deafened, it's called. So they discover their hearing loss later in life, or anyone who calls themselves hard of hearing, which covers a kind of partial deafness, I guess some people call it. But deaf covers it all. So I never say I have partial deafness, or I don't say I have hearing loss. And I never say I have a hearing impairment. I say I am deaf with a lowercase d. Now, deaf with a capital D is quite often reserved for the deaf community and deaf culture. So what that means is people who grow up in deaf environments using British Sign Language as their first language. Maybe their whole family is deaf. They learn the traditions of being deaf, the history of the deaf culture. And that's why it has a capital D, because it's around culture and traditions. I mean, there is a movement in the UK and in the US to kind of bring everything together under one umbrella, whether that's lowercase d or uppercase d. But still in the UK, people still use the uppercase and the lowercase d. So I always say I'm deaf. But when I went to an audiologist and I first discovered I was deaf, they introduced it to me as hearing loss, which is why, I'm an author. I've written 3 books, 2 of them children's and 1 nonfiction for adults. And that is called Living with Hearing Loss and Deafness, because hearing loss is quite often the way it's introduced to you before you've kind of explored and discovered the deaf community. And then hopefully once you've done that, you'd be calling yourself deaf with a lowercase d, or hard of hearing, some people use as well.
You've answered so many questions in my head just on that bit, so thank you. And it was interesting, I think in the government, they have a census, and it is VI and HI, visually impaired and hearing impaired. So
Yeah.
again, into that. Then I went to, so hearing loss. I went, no, because that infers you already had it. So that doesn't fit very many people. So basically, all deaf covers everyone. That's the important part.
Lowercase d deaf. Yeah,
Lowercase d.
but it's also really important to be led by the individual. So if someone, I've said most people don't like the phrase hearing impaired, but if someone calls themselves hearing impaired and you're a hearing person, don't say, no, you shouldn't call yourself that. Because people can choose how they want to identify and how they want to kind of describe themselves. But on the whole, yeah, lowercase d deaf.
So basically, if someone says they are deaf, you're basically going, you're still in that scale zone. You're not going, oh, you cannot hear. You're somewhere in that zone. So you then need to ask, or maybe find out more information of what support or how. I'm trying not to say all the wrong things, and it's really quite worrying.
No, you're doing well. But this is a good, and people also, it's important to remember, like, deaf people and disabled people, because I'm disabled too, are human beings. So, if you launch in really confidently with the wrong thing, then, not ideal. But if you're like, I'm really sorry, I don't know the exact language, so please tell me if I'm getting this wrong, blah, 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 blah. And then you open the door for, I'm willing to learn, educate me. I think the important thing to say is, so if I say I'm deaf, a lot of people then ask me how deaf I am. And that's a little bit like, and some people might be really happy to answer that. But it's a little bit like, in the disabled community asking, oh, I have a disabled child as well. Like, oh, what's wrong with her? Or like, how did you get this way? Or what happened? A lot of people ask. And it's like, it's none of your business, actually. It's my medical information that I can choose to share with you or not. So I think the way you said it is perfect. Is there anything I can do accessibility wise to make things easier, rather than, well, how deaf are you actually though?
I know. I'm literally going, I know that's not the question. But again, as Joanna Grace talks about the phrase, with us, not to us. So then it's not, how do I communicate to you? Because that's very much of you need and it's no, I need to. So I literally start going, oh, I'm going to get really confused in this in a second. But it's that, how can we communicate effectively between us? That's the
Yeah.
question I probably need to ask.
Oh, and I think put it on you. Say, because we're always the one who's telling everyone how to communicate. So I think if I was a hearing person, I'd say, is there anything I can do to make this meeting more accessible? Basically, because, often we do all the things. Like, we're expected to book a BSL interpreter or a lip speaker, even though access to work is months long waiting list or might never come. And, people expect us to like pay for a BSL interpreter out of our own pocket. And, we'll have to think about, if someone asks me to go for a meeting, I'll have to think about the space that I meet them in, so that it'll be a quiet enough space with not a lot of background noise, so I'll be able to hear them. Will it be bright enough that I'll be able to lip read? So often it's always on the deaf or disabled person to make those kind of adjustments. So actually having someone say, what can I do, is lovely, because I'm like, oh yeah, great, you do it for a change.
But also an interesting bit there again, which you before we kind of recorded, you sent me information about how best to support you, and it's important. Not every deaf person knows BSL,
Yeah,
so
exactly. And
don't assume.
yeah, there are 18 million people in the UK with some form of hearing loss or deafness. So that is 1 in 3. And there are about 200,000 people who use British Sign Language as their first language. So it's really important to know about British Sign Language and to know about BSL interpreters and to make things accessible. And also, it's important to know that British Sign Language is a different language to English. So if you email someone who uses British Sign Language as their first language, they will be reading your email in English, which is not their first language. So
What's
it's similar, as in, the words translate, but there's a completely different sentence structure. So even thinking an email is accessible for a BSL user is not the case. And thinking captions are accessible for a BSL user, again, is not the case, because written English is written differently to the way you'd sign using BSL. So it's important to have BSL interpreters, and it's important to have captions as well.
So one interesting thing, and I did it randomly because I know you can get like Chat GPT to do all the translation, and it will translate into Braille. And I just went, what happens if you type in, can you translate this text into BSL? And it did. It was the word, a lot of the words were there, maybe in a different order. But I would just say, I'm probably saying this wrong, but I would just say it was more direct. They're kind of, the filling words were missing.
Well, I think the problem with that is BSL isn't a written language.
Yeah.
So people you might think it's more direct. It's actually not. It's more nuanced, but the nuance is in the physicality, the body language, the facial expression. There are some signs that mean quite a few different words, but it's all about the way you sign it. and, your expression, the emotion that you're giving off, your physicality, the context of the word. So, yeah, writing it down really doesn't kind of do it
I was like, what are you going to
justice.
do? You're not going to give me the signs in there because that's going to make sense. So yeah, it was very interesting just how it changed that. And I said at the beginning, actually, I have no real lived experience, and I realised I do. I have done 2 presentations to school with BSL interpreters, and that was a really interesting experience because, first of all, there were 2 interpreters. And they took it in turns. So it was about an hour long, but they took it in turns because it is tiring.
Mm.
Also,
And also, it's tiring. Signing is tiring, but it's also tiring because they don't know the context and the language and the whatever your speech is, right? Because you
yes.
wrote your speech, so it's always less tiring for you when you're like delivering your own thing. But when someone else has to translate it, yeah, that's really tiring.
And also, because I was selling our software, I'm talking about features in our software and it's language we use our way, words we use. They are English words, but we use them for brand and product names and all of this. And I would say something, so they just look at me going, right, say that again. And it was that they would
Mm.
have to understand it to translate it. And it was, yeah, it's appreciation of how much extra work is involved.
Yeah, and it's, and if you do have a BSL interpreter, it's really important to send them what they're going to be interpreting in advance and any language that you might be using in advance. Because also, if it's niche, like it's a software thing, it might, the signs for software-y type language aren't, something that you generally use in everyday conversation. So, they might have to look those up or find out what they are. So, yeah, it's always, I think BSL interpreters have a really hard job because they're always sort of turning up and quite often don't know what's going to happen. Or it's only one BSL interpreter for like a whole evening of 2.5 hours. And they're like, whoa. And, there's a lot of kind of people ad lib, right? And they can work with that, but if they have a little bit of a heads up of what's going to happen and what sort of thing is going to be talked about, then it really helps. But you see, so I'm learning British Sign Language, but I'm not fluent. So often people, might assume that I need a BSL interpreter or book one for me. And I, that it might help a little bit, but because I'm not fluent, it's not actually the right access for me. So I use a lip speaker. So a lip speaker is like a BSL interpreter, but instead of signing in BSL, they repeat the lip pattern of the person in a clear way. So that's useful. It sounds strange when you first hear of it because you're like, but surely you can just look at the lip pattern of the person talking. But what it's particularly useful for is, the lip speaker I work with, I know her really well. So I know her lip pattern. And if I'm meeting a new person, especially if they have an accent or facial hair, which you do, sometimes to begin with, it takes a minute to get used to. I mean, even if they don't have those things, it takes a minute to get used to the lip pattern of that person because everyone does it slightly differently. So that takes a minute before you can start lip reading properly. Also, with lip reading, you will never, even the best lip readers in the world, even, Rose Ayling-Ellis in that program where she's a lip reader, you will never get 100% of the words because some words on the lips look the same as a completely different word. So also a lot of lip reading is about the context of the situation and kind of filling in the blanks like a crossword of like, that looks like he said peas, but he's not talking about food. He's talking about something differently. So it's probably a different word. And what other word looks like peas? So, there's a lot of that. So having my lip speaker means that if I'm like, oh, what was that word? I can look at her. She can fill in the blanks. But also, quite often, I have a lip speaker if there's an environment where the person, isn't standing facing me and is well lit, which makes it easier to lip read. So if I'm on set, if I'm filming a drama, you know, and there's lots going on, I did the new series of Father Brown. And so I had my lip speaker on set for that, which is great because, we were filming in a courtroom. So there was lots going on. There were lots of extras. There were the other actors there with me. Some of them were on the other side of the room. There were like 3 different cameras. There was the director and camera people. So there's lots going on, and people are moving around while they're talking, which means that I don't necessarily see their lips. And my deafness means that I do have some hearing in the lower registers and not in the higher registers. So also for me, some people's voices are easier to hear. Annoyingly, I can hear more men than women.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah, which is, sorry, but it is annoying. I'd rather hear my sisters having a chat. So, and so my lip speaker can really help with that. And a lot of people don't know how to book a lip speaker, but there's a company called Lip Speaker UK, and they have lip speakers, and they can travel to you, and that's how you get in touch with them.
So a question just in my head, I just sit there trying to position. I'm picturing you on set, and I'm guessing you know exactly where your lip speaker is, and you're kind of always watching them. Obviously, you've got the directors probably giving you things, but someone else might be saying, how do they let you know that each person is speaking? Just out of curiosity.
Well, so normally I'd look at the person, it's down to the person to get my attention. And normally the director, so if I'm filming a scene, I won't look at my lip speaker, I'll look at the other actor, and I can normally see their mouth. And if I can't see their mouth, like I'll have to come up with the actor or with the director, like a visual cue, so I know when to say my next bit if I can't see. But normally, because I do have some hearing, normally I'll hear that they're saying something, even if I can't hear the words. And then when they stop talking, I know it's my turn, and I know what's coming up because there's a script. So I wouldn't look at my lip speaker like during the scene, but in between, when the director's like calling action, my lip speaker will say action. So I might, the director might wave to get my attention, and then I know that they're saying something. Normally, the directors will come over to you, like in front of the camera, and talk to you anyway, especially if they know you're deaf. And if there's anything I miss, I sort of just look over at my lip speaker.
So again, as you mentioned earlier, you're working a lot harder than everyone else.
Yeah. Especially without a lip speaker. And quite often, people always say to me when I say I'm deaf, they're like, well, you're not properly deaf though, are you? Because or you'd never know you're deaf. Which I always find really interesting, because when people say you'd never know you're deaf, because it's obviously not something I'm trying to hide, because I've written 3 books and I talk about it all the time. And I have hearing aids, and my hearing aids have hearing aid jewelry, which is like jazzy. So
Nice.
yeah, it's not something I'm ever trying to hide. But so I think it's interesting that people think like, oh, it's almost like them saying, you seem normal. And it's like, I don't want to seem normal. Like, I'm not trying to hide it. I'm proud to be deaf. And I think that what they're saying is that they assume I'm hearing, like they are. But actually that's because I'm working so hard
Yep.
that I'm meeting them at the hearing, visually at the hearing level. So they assume I'm hearing. And when people first meet me and they don't know I'm deaf, which is rare nowadays, because as I said, I talk about it and write about it a lot. But and then they discover I'm deaf, people get really thrown by it, and they sort of then don't know how to sort of react to me. And they might say, well, you're not properly deaf, because they've thought of me as hearing. And I just think that's really interesting, because a lot of people assume that if you're deaf, you have absolutely no hearing, as in you hear silence. And the majority of deaf people, like there are some people who hear silence, but the majority of deaf people don't hear nothing. They'll hear, like, they might have tinnitus, or they might hear muffled noises, or, So if there's like a loud bang or a car, backfires or whatever it is, and I look, people will be like, "Oh, I thought you were deaf." I'm like, "Yeah, but I can hear that because that's a really, loud thing." Or some deaf people hear certain tones better than others. So sometimes I might hear a noise that is actually quite quiet, but because of my, setup of my hearing, that noise will feel to me louder than any other noise. If I'm in a restaurant and there's a coffee machine going, that like low hum, to me that'll feel louder than the person in front of me talking. But people don't necessarily understand that. So they'll be like, "Well, I thought you were deaf, so how come you can hear the coffee machine?" So it's just, I think it's a really it's an awareness thing, isn't it? But it's something that people don't often kind of research or find out about. So they just assume deaf equals absolutely no hearing. And actually, it's more complicated than that because we're humans and we're all complicated beings. I have
There
I
are
have
half. I
ADHD.
was about to say
Sorry.
there's like lots of different flavors of deafness, so
Yeah.
you just can't assume.
Exactly. And, I have ADHD and I have lots of friends with ADHD and we talk about the fun things that we get up to. But, I have time blindness and some of my friends with ADHD don't experience that as much as they experience other things. And, it's the same with everything. We're experiencing that umbrella term and I love a label. I know my mum's always like, "Oh, why do you have to label yourself?" I'm like, my pasta is labeled in the cupboard, like it says pasta, and my sugar has a sugar, and that's useful. And so I find my labels useful because it helps me find my community. It helps me give people information about what access I might need. I love a label, but it doesn't mean that we're all exactly the same.
So one of the things I learn about hearing aids is our ears are amazing. Our ears are so cool and complex, and they will be hearing everything and then filtering it all. They'll be getting rid of that coffee machine noise. They'll be getting rid of the noise outside the restaurant. They'll be getting rid of something else. They'll be just bringing that back so you can really listen to that person in front of you. And that all happens subconsciously. You don't do it, it knows. It somehow knows. And my understanding is with a hearing aid, almost like just everything just gets turned up, is my understanding. And again, there's probably 500 variations of a hearing aid. But the idea is it's not selective. It is everything is getting turned up.
Yes and no. So modern hearing aids have more technology that is better at focusing in, directionally. And my hearing aids connect to an app on my phone. And so on my phone app, I can have different hearing aid settings. So I can have like a setting for a party, which means that it tries to filter out more of that background noise and focus in on what might be in front of me. Or, I have a loop setting where I can try and connect to a loop. You might see often there's a symbol with an ear and a loop symbol. And certain businesses have it so that I can connect in, so any microphones would connect straight to my hearing aid. Although very often they don't work or the staff don't know how to work them and they've just been switched off for years. Even though legally that is, an adjustment that comes under the Equality and Disability Act. But there we go. So the modern hearing aids, are doing a lot to work on that. Hearing aids through the NHS, it's a bit of a postcode lottery as to how modern a hearing aid on the NHS you'll get. Some people get like the most up to date one, and other people can get hearing aids like 10 years behind modern technology. So my hearing aids, I mean, because of what I do, I'm very lucky that I get gifted hearing aids. So, some influencers get like cool handbags or like cars. I get hearing aids, but it is cool. And actually, hearing aids are very expensive. So I'm thrilled to get hearing aids. But so my hearing aids recharge. So I literally take them off at night, put them in a little charger, which is like a little pot with a lid at night. Then they charge up and then I put them on. But, some hearing aids have little batteries and then you have to change the battery when it runs out. But the important thing to know is a hearing aid cannot bring your hearing to the level of a person with full hearing. So a hearing aid cannot fix, in inverted commas, your hearing. It can work with what you've got and try and help living in a hearing world, where it's not accessible if you can't hear. Because, quite often when we talk about disability and we talk about deafness, the kind of prejudice or the idea is that, deaf or disabled people are, oh, poor them, they're broken in some way, there's something wrong with them. And actually, I don't see it like that at all. I'm very proud to be deaf and I'm very proud to be disabled. And I think that brings a lot to my life. It's actually society that is broken, because if like fire alarms were originally designed to flash all the lights in the building as well as make a loud noise, it would have been deaf accessible. And there's so many things that mean that we live in a hearing world that isn't accessible to deaf people, which is why we need hearing aids to hear. If everyone learned British Sign Language at school and just had a few phrases, you could go into any coffee shop and order a coffee, and hearing people would, be able to deal with that. But deaf people can't do that. Well, I mean, they can, and we have to all the time. And quite often it's like, just point or write it down if you can't work it out. But so, and I think that point is really important. We're not broken. There's nothing wrong with us. We might have difficult moments that come with it. You might have pain that comes with your disability, or fatigue, and those things aren't fun. But on the whole, it's actually society that's not made pavements flat and wide enough for wheelchairs, or, and all those other things that would mean that we can just carry on living our lives.
Definitely. I've over the last probably about 7-8 years, I've started using noise cancelling headphones a lot. It's so much more calming. But the problem is if you're on a train, there is the next stop is you are on coach 1 of 10, but the driver will always make an announcement over the speaker. And I'm there with my headphones on, no idea that actually it's not going all the way, it's stopping 5 stations early.
Yeah.
Or you go to the airport, and again, noise cancelling headphones at airports are bliss. But I'm walking around there and they could be calling out, "Mr. Pickles, please come to." I've got no idea. And it's that default communication method that seems to be used is really limiting. And if you're at an airport and they're calling out your name, I'm pretty sure the airline has a number of ways they can get in contact with you. They could send you a text message, but they're relying on just having a booming voice over a loudspeaker.
Yeah, and that's just one of the ways that everything's so inaccessible. Like, how many screens are there at an airport? Like, just put all announcements also on a screen, you know? That would have a huge impact. But I mean, again, that's reading, right? So it's not accessible in BSL. So have a screen, and quite often now at train stations, you might see there's like a really big, almost like a vertical TV, and they have people signing. So they've pre-recorded BSL interpreters signing, delay on platform 3 or whatever it is. And then whilst they're putting up the announcement, they can also put the BSL translation of that. And, with all the advancements we have now, it's not that hard, is it? Like, if you're preparing the technology originally, you just set it all up in advance and then you're good to go. But it's, it's not thought about. And there's so much kind of accessibility out there, and so many advancements and technology and tools as well, that we could just make part of everything that we do. And actually, a lot of disabled people are incredible inventors and have invented so many amazing things. Like the guy who invented, I can't remember his name right now. He invented the car wing mirror, and he was deaf. So we
Wow.
could see to the side when we were driving. back in the day when they just invented cars. And quite often a lot of things are invented for access by disabled people, and then they just become, every day because obviously they're useful to everyone.
Fascinating. So one of the bits of research, it talks about the classroom environment and what makes it accessible. And in my head, I went straight to, you probably want it really quiet, but actually, from some of the things you said, you also need it to be well lit.
Yeah. So there's also this thing in buildings that there are some deaf architects, and they're kind of changing the game because we build buildings to just stand up. We don't build them to like acoustically cushion sound and protect us from noise pollution. And everyone could do with some protection from noise pollution. There was a recent study, I think it was in 2023, which is 40% of adults are exposed to high levels of prolonged noise pollution, you know, and that has a big impact on your mental health as well as, possibly your hearing. So build a building that has insulation for heating, but also for sound. That's useful for everyone. So, in a classroom environment, you might not be building a new one. So, there are things that you can do to cushion sound acoustically to make it a nice environment for everyone. And that also makes it nice for like children who might be neurodiverse or have sound sensitivity issues. So any soft furnishings absorb sound. So adding curtains, like adding a curtain across a wall, for example, having, your reading area with lots of cushions and bean bags helps. Even plants help absorb sound. You can also get acoustic wall panels that have certain materials that absorb sound. And yes, nice and bright. So well lit means that we can see you if you're signing or if we're lip reading. Also facing the class while you talk, not turning your back to the board to write on it whilst you're also still talking. Um, if if you're doing some sort of presentation or something where lots of people are going to be talking, because also you can only lip read one person at a time, right?
Yeah.
So if there's like an assembly with lots of people lined up and they're all going to be speaking after one another, it's difficult to know where to look and you might miss things. So, having the text printed out or on a slide or, given in advance or afterwards. There are lots of ways that we can make classrooms accessible.
And I was just thinking the era before the interactive whiteboards where you had the projectors, where often the classroom lights would be off so you could have the whiteboard, which probably meant the teacher was in darkness and you could not even see them. Now we're in this world of interactive whiteboard, it helps. But again, it's not just about being in a bright room. You can't have that light behind you because then you'll be in shadow. So it's about
Yeah.
making sure your face can be seen.
Yeah, and a lot of times the classrooms will have a lovely big window so you can look out onto the playground. And if the teacher stands in front of that window and is backlit, it means you can't see their face for lip reading. So yeah, again, where the lighting is, having it pointed at where a teacher tends to stand. Also just having like some support, having a lip speaker for students who might need it, to sit next to them. And so if they miss anything, they can look at their lip speaker, or them having a note taker so they don't have to, rely on lip reading. Because as I said, even with lip reading, you're not going to get 100% of the words. And if it's in an environment where you're learning, so each word can be really important, missing a key, like in maths, missing a word can completely change the outcome of the equation, right? If you miss 5 plus 5, then obviously you're going to get the answer wrong. So, even little things like that, it's super important. So if there's any key information, like having that written down, having a note taker, having a lip reader or a BSL interpreter to support a child who's deaf or has hearing aids or signs.
You just wanted to say about learning. It's that realization that you're going into a science lab, you're going to do a brand new topic, and probably that teacher's going to throw 30 brand new words at you that you've never used or heard before, and you're trying to lip read and you've got brand new words.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's not just like hearing it and trying to spell it if you had full hearing. If you're lip reading, it's lip reading it and trying to work out then how that might be spelt or said out. A lot of deaf children as well learning new words often, they might read the word but won't necessarily know how it sounds or how to make that work in their mouth. And some deaf children go through like speech and language lessons um to help them with that. But actually a great way of helping with that is learning British Sign Language, because British Sign Language begins with the alphabet, which is fingerspelled. And it's, historically, deaf children were stopped from learning British Sign Language because people, silly people, thought it would stop them from developing spoken language. And, a lot of deaf people decide not to use their voice and just sign, and that's fine. But actually, studies now show that learning British Sign Language helps with all other language because it's still a language. And also, with the finger spelling, you're actually learning the words, learning how to spell the words, learning, this vocabulary. So it actually helps. So also, I think all deaf children should have access to British Sign Language. And it was never something I had access to. So I'm in my late 30s and I'm learning British Sign Language now. And I absolutely love it because for me as a deaf person, the bits I know, because obviously I am still learning as well, but the bits I know, it's so relaxing for me to sign because I don't have to try and hear. And the fatigue you get from lip reading is huge. If I'm out all day as an adult, right? So I'm also not learning a new information, growing, hormones. I mean, I have a different set of hormones, but all of that going on. And as an adult, if I'm out all day at meetings and maybe I've got an event in the evening, the next day I need to rest for the whole day because I'm so fatigued from lip reading and like trying to use whatever hearing I still have to help with that and the context of it. It's exhausting. So for children, you don't realize how tired they are, like every day.
I did hear that when you started saying about kind of if you teach someone sign language, it may stop them communicating. I have come across that before. And the idea of if they've learned that they won't need to was the kind of the idea is. But I think the opposite hurts. Opposite works because basically if that person can't really communicate, they're gonna stop trying. As soon as you give them that
Yeah.
ability to connect and communicate, they're gonna want more. So they're gonna want to learn those areas, and they will go, but if they're struggling to communicate, that desire to communicate will reduce.
Yeah. And communication is like the most important thing about being human, right? Relating to other people, relationships. You learn so much. Solidarity, your community. There's a brilliant film, kind of documentary film called Name Me Lawand. And it's about a boy who comes from abroad. I can't remember exactly which country now, but he's a deaf boy and his family bring him over to the UK and he's never had access to sign language and he's always felt left out. And he starts going to a deaf school in the UK and learning British Sign Language. And it follows his journey, and you just see his personality develop. He completely comes out of his shell. He forms these like incredibly interesting opinions about the world and deafness and what he wants to do in the future. And like just him having that language completely changes his life. And I think it's so, so important for everyone to have access, whether you're deaf or not, and for everyone to have some form of communication, whatever that is, so that they can express that. For some people, some nonverbal people might learn to sign, they might communicate through their art. Whatever it is, we need that outlet, that way of communicating and showing how we experience the world and express ourselves. And British Sign Language is a brilliant way to do that, and is very different to Makaton.
Yes, very different, very different.
Yeah, Makaton is a series of signs. British Sign Language is a language.
Yes, very different. Now, I think it was last year, but I lose track of time. The BBC had a really amazing little clip. I can't remember if it was from Waterloo Road or wherever, if it was just a little clip. But it was about a student at school who'd kind of moved from their school into mainstream, was really struggling, and then they got the BSL interpreter in, and he was like, "What level are you?" And they're like, "Oh, I'm level 1." And they're like, "But I need level 7 to pass my GCSEs. You can't understand the language." And it was a really powerful bit at the end where he was kind of advocating for himself, and it was really powerful that if that young person in the school has a BSL interpreter, they really, in reality, have one person to talk to. And it's that really powerful. You go, "Oh, they've got that communication," and you're going, "No, they've got an isolation tool. That person, that's the only person they can really communicate with." And it just helps you realize actually how many barriers and challenges there are that you just don't even notice.
Mm. Yeah, so it was from Waterloo Road, and it was written by Charlie Swinburne, who is a brilliant deaf writer and photographer. I actually worked with him on my first children's book, Harriet versus the Galaxy. So it was informed by lived experience, and I think that's why it was so powerful. Yeah, exactly. If you have someone, imagine if your French teacher, was like, hadn't passed their full French exam, and they were trying to, teach you French or help you learn French. It'd be like, what? That doesn't make sense. So, having that access there, but having good access there, like people who are trained in being a British Sign Language interpreter and everything that, that goes into that. And it's like lip speaking. Like, people might be like, "Oh, I could do that. I'll just like repeat a lip pattern." But like, no, these people, like, they're trained. There's ways of doing it that help and ways of doing it that hinder. And, if we're just trying to understand what's going on, we need someone to help who's trained in it, not another issue that then it gets involved with, our access barrier. And also, it's really important to know that it's against the law not to make reasonable adjustments for deaf and disabled people in any environment, in a work environment, in an education environment, right? So that should be given. Like, all children should have access. Reasonable adjustments should be made. And, if for whatever reason a BSL interpreter, was ill that day and didn't turn up, don't just be like, "Oh, well, they're ill." There are so many other adjustments that you could make, because, it's not down to the deaf person, it's not down to the disabled person, but quite often it is.
Yep.
It's down to us to sort all that out. We've got a lot of other stuff going on. Like, you take on some of the admin hearing people. And I'm not to say that's down to teachers, because teachers have to do a lot as it is. But that is down to, like, the school governors, like, making adjustments, the head teacher, the management team, the wider, school group. All that stuff needs to be in place to support everyone, and not
And
just
again,
the
we
parents as well.
and again we talk about if there is that need for that BSL interpreter. To me, that is like in the same zone of having EpiPens. It's a requirement.
Hmm.
If that child who needs that BSL interpreter has attended school that day, they haven't really attended because they've not been able to access it. So it's one of those things that it's not a tokenistic thing. It's not a nice thing. It is literally a requirement for that person to be able to access their education.
Yeah.
It's
And
and
but
we
I
just
think
take it for granted.
yeah, but also I think quite often we focus on BSL interpreters, and that's really important. Yes. But like we said, lighting, acoustics in the room, is there everything written down with all the key information in case it's missed? There are so many other things that we can do that are free or cheap or straightforward that people often shy away from. So everything needs to be looked at. It's not just, oh, we need a BSL interpreter. We've done that, tick.
I was just thinking as we talk about, we're talking again in schools, and there's always going to be a lot of group work and kind of interpersonal skills. And you talked about how when you're on set, you kind of know, you kind of hear the low noises, and when he pauses, oh, it's my turn to speak. And that's those skills you learn over time. How can schools support deaf children to kind of be confident, be part of those, and also how can the schools help the other children include them as well?
Yeah, I think it's education. Like, children are amazing and are very accepting. So it's really only through seeing adults do it wrong that they learn to not be accepting, right? And we all make mistakes, but let's not try and do it wrong. So, I think stuff like, so my two children's books, Harriet versus the Galaxy and The Night the Moon Went Out, have a deaf protagonist. And schools get in touch with me and teachers and say, we have a deaf child in my class. So as a class, we've read your book with a deaf main character. And in the book, it talks about hearing aids. And then we've done some stuff around, tasks around the book. And so it's not just like, everyone look at Sam. Sam's deaf. Sam, what do you want everyone to know? Which completely singles out like the child. It's like, as a group, let's all learn about deafness. And let's do it in a fun way through, a book or a task or whatever it is. And just bringing that awareness to everyone. And maybe get a speaker in from the local community who runs a deaf club, or all learn British Sign Language together. Signature, again, who is the charity I mentioned earlier, Signature have this online course which is free for schools and teachers to sign up to, and it like teaches a few signs of British Sign Language. And so, doing that together as a class. So it's not about, oh, Sam's deaf, so we have to learn about deafness. It's let's all learn this interesting information, just like we learn about the kings and queens. We're also going to learn about this. And even if there isn't a deaf child in your class, learning about that and, exposing them to all those things, like read books as a class by blind authors, read books as a class by disabled authors, as well as non-disabled authors, deaf authors, as well as hearing authors. And I think it's just bringing all of that into the everyday life and the culture, and also like hire deaf and disabled people. Like, if 18 million people in the UK have some form of hearing loss or deafness, how many deaf people do you have working at your school? Because there should be, like, just in like statistics, there should be 1 in 3. So, are the people who work for you, do they feel comfortable, like teachers, staff, management, do they feel comfortable sharing their deafness as an adult with you? Have they told you they have hearing aids? Is the access there for the adults who are deaf? Because if it's not there for the adults who are deaf, it's not going to be there for the children who are deaf. So it's also about looking broader. It's not just like, oh gosh, we have a deaf child now, we have to do something. That shouldn't be a consideration, because everything should just be covered as part of the hiring strategy, the culture at the school to work there, the culture at the school for the children. How many disabled staff members do you have? How many disabled visiting speakers do you have? And it is, and non-white people. How many non-white staff members do you have? How many non-white speakers do you have? How many books by non-white authors do you read? It's all of that stuff.
And it's interesting. We in the representation really matters. It's being seen, being visible, being role models, And it's really interesting when you kind of, being a bloke, you don't notice these things because men are everywhere. But it's watching my daughters grow up and go, look at what are their role models, who are they seeing? You then start going, oh, you're not seeing as many women everywhere. Why is that? And you start asking questions, and it's like, well, there. And it is really fascinating. But what you just touched on there is the idea of schools will say they're inclusive, we're doing all of this stuff, but they'll often, as you say, not you said, but they will probably only do raising awareness on deafness if there is a deaf child.
Yeah.
They won't be doing it if there was no one in the school who is deaf. It's not on their radar. It's just
And quite
interesting.
often they will, you know, only do it if there's a child who is deaf and has British Sign Language as their first language. So if there's a child with hearing aids and, there's no complaints from the parents, because, as a mum of disabled child, she's not at school yet, but we quite often are the ones fighting for the rights, especially when they're young. So if there's not that parent fighting for the rights, or there is, but they're a bit tired at the moment, or we've just moved schools and we need a break, then also that deaf awareness doesn't happen because people think, oh, well, they've got hearing aids, so they're fine actually now. So we'll just ignore it. And yeah, actually that accessibility should be there all the time. And I think
Definitely.
there's something like 55,000 children with who are deaf, who have some form of deafness or hearing loss in the UK. So, there are a lot. You're gonna get some of us in your school. So, put things in place now and get ready.
So, on that note, as the last thing in this podcast, what do you want to say to schools that you haven't said already?
Oh, I think thank you to the schools who are inclusive, who are doing, those teachers who work so hard, those extra hours, even though they don't get paid for it, to go and do the training themselves out of their own pocket to, find my book, buy my book out of their own money to bring into their class to make those children feel seen and heard and represented. Thank you. And then to anyone, that isn't there yet, ask for the support, push it up the chain. There's a legal requirement from the management to make reasonable adjustments. It shouldn't just be on you, but if you are fighting for it, thank you for fighting for it. Keep going. And if your deaf unit is called a hearing impaired unit, please, please change it.
It's one of
Cool.
those things. Words matter, and it's
Yeah.
like if you say non-verbal, it's like no, please don't say non. You've decided they can't say pre-verbal, and that hearing, yeah. So when we hear those, we got to make sure we got to change our language.
Yeah. And
Cool.
also always check in with people with lived experience before you change the language. Don't read an article on the internet and go, okay, this is the language. Check in because stuff changes, cultures change, the community changes. So always check in with someone with lived experience.
Definitely. Thank you for coming on today. I've learned a lot, and that's what I always love about doing this podcast is I get to learn and I get to ask those questions, and I get to have people come on who tell me that I'm wrong politely.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I don't think
really.
I told you were wrong. I
No,
just
you went
talked
no,
about
but
lots of
yes, but
things.
no. I always know, but no. It's one of the things. You sit there and you're going, and it's immediately you're doing this thing, and you just fall on something you've used for years, and you start saying it. And as soon as you start saying it, you're going, I already know what I'm about to say is wrong, and I just need to stop because it's kind of the language you've been given, hearing impairment, all those sorts of things. You just start talking, you're going, and I literally went, I know it's going to be wrong. I'm just going to stop talking because I don't know what I should be saying. Why not? Why don't I know? I should know. It should be widely known.
Mm.
Really
But
interesting.
and part of that is just getting disability and deaf awareness training. Really, that should be you should be having that in a job as standard every 3 years. So if you've never had it before, then that's something straight away that should be fixed. And, any management should be like, oh, yeah, we should have done that actually. So let's do that now.
It's Adam Hill who hosts The Last Leg, isn't it? Is it Adam Hill?
Adam Hills, yeah.
So he did, this was, again, Last Leg was kicking off, and it was just as it really started. He did a stand-up show, and he had his sign language interpreter there. And it was really interesting because I learnt loads from that. I learnt so much. And it was literally like as you saying right earlier, it's not just the words you're saying, it's how you say it. And he was literally then started talking French. And then he'd say it, and the camera would switch to the interpreter. And you watch how they were just saying it completely differently. Then he changed his, and they would change. And then he just made a noise, and she still had to convey the noise. And it was really, and I learned a lot from that. And I think any way you can be exposed to that is going to help you understand.
Yes, but also there's this whole wave on the internet of people like sharing videos of sign language interpreters and being like, "Oh my God, hilarious, aren't they amazing?" Like in a way that they're like, "Oh, great." But actually it's kind of they're just doing their job and they're just speaking in their language. So it's different if they're like a performer and they're acting and using British Sign Language. But if they're just an interpreter, like they don't necessarily, like if they're good at interpreting and doing their job, great. But if people are sharing it because they're like, oh, isn't it funny that they had to sign this thing that the artist sang? There's something problematic about that because it's like, well, they're just doing a language, you're just not used to seeing it. So there's also an interesting.
So the ones I've
thing
seen,
around that.
People like sign language Eminem.
Yeah.
And they literally, everyone's just going, this is amazing. All the emotions they're conveying through their sign language.
But also that is just sign language.
Yeah.
And so we're celebrating because so there are some brilliant deaf interpreters that go to like a music festival and so they'll interpret for the deaf audience and they're deaf themselves, so they get it. So they know the lyrics of the song, for example. Then they'll have a hearing person with them that makes sure that they're like staying to the beat of the song. But they're a deaf person interpreting the lyrics of the song with their own language, which means it's so much like deeper and lovelier. Whereas often interpreters are hearing. So we're sharing a hearing person performing BSL. And actually, they're just there to interpret for the deaf people. They're not performing.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
I do.
So we're like, oh, they're conveying all the emotion. And it's like, yeah, but that's the language. That's not them.
Yes. And that's the thing is,
there's really good interpreters, great, but people aren't sharing it because it's really good necessarily. They're sharing it because they're like, oh, they can sign as quick as Eminem raps, and they, are signing naughty words, and it's funny and emotional.
Well, generally the ones I've seen, perhaps I'm in the better social media places. Not really, probably, but the ones I've seen are generally really in awe. Of it,
but that's the thing. Why are you in awe of a language? Do you know what I mean? Like, would you share a French person just speaking French just because you're in awe of the French? You wouldn't share it because you're in awe of the language. So it's not like, oh, you're wrong, that's bad. But it's just an interesting point to think about when you come across those videos.
It is.
Of like, this is interesting. Why are people sharing this? Is this a deaf person signing? Is this a hearing interpreter? Why are we sharing it? What's the conversation around this? So it's just a think point.
Yes, it's that. Yes, I know exactly where you're going with that, and it makes sense. It's yes, definitely. Lots more to learn. But yes.
But there are also some brilliant deaf people who do sign songs like on social media. So follow them and follow their
I will
performances signing songs, and that's fine. You can share those.
I will find some. So you've sent me, I've got loads that I mentioned earlier. I've got a link to one of your books. I'll try and find the link to the other books. I'm going to add in the link to the Signature Deaf Awareness course, and I've got loads of social medias and your website, so loads of people can find out more about what you do and all the work and follow you and be educated. And as always, you'll find the show notes wherever you listen to the podcast or on the Sendcast website. And if you want to get in touch, let us know your thoughts, suggest topics, or anything else, please message us on social media or send an email to hello@thesendcast.com. The Sendcast is created by us here at B Squared, and we help to show the small steps of progress pupils with SEND make. And we can help show progress for a wide range of abilities and ages. We have frameworks going from birth all the way through to 25. We have our engagement model stuff for the most complex learners, all the way up to our steps for life, looking at functional academic skills, employability skills, and life skills, and lots in between. Visit the B Square website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through our assessment software. But for now, thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week with another episode of the Sendcast. It's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from me.
Bye, everyone.